It's time to move on to the wrap-up session of the roundtable discussions. And the person that's going to coordinate that is Dr. Todd Applegate. Todd grew up in western Iowa and earned a BS and master's degree from Iowa State University, and then went to The Ohio State University for his PhD degree, postdoc at the University of Maryland, and today he's a professor of poultry science at Purdue University. And he also today is president of the Poultry Science Association. And Todd will lead the discussion on the wrap-up. Todd?
Thank you, Don. The group has given me kind of a yeoman's task of trying to create a synopsis of everything that was discussed this morning. And there's a lot of wonderful things. I've taken a little bit of liberty, if you will, to editorialize a few things. So if you disagree with me, please let me know. I enjoy that. But what I would like to start with is essentially what we heard from your group discussions within the last hour before lunch. So what you see here is just some of what I could read quickly, not to overall encompass everything that was within your notes. What we intend to do within this after this session is to go back and essentially create another document that we will send back to all of you as part of this group. So in the first discussion point within your tables, one of the things that we were looking at was what is the primary barriers to essentially animal nutrition research. So this is some of those bullets coming forward. One of the first and foremost is that we tend to see ourselves working in silos. We tend to reward ourselves from the academic side within those silos. Some institutions have tried to go beyond that to look at and reward interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research with some success, but it all comes back to rewarding the individual. So we're looking beyond that. How can we actually move beyond that? We also tend to look at discipline-based versus solution-based approaches, and that tends to create some of those silos as well. Within our group, one of the things we discussed is in some cases it's good to have those silos, but in many cases the conversation that needs to happen across silos does not happen at all. It's viewed that there is a shortage of students predominantly domestically, and in some cases on faculty lines, particularly driven from funding mechanisms. There was one group that brought forward the need to monitor antibiotic use, and I think this came forward in one of the panel members this morning, to monitor both use in animals and then traceability forward. Federal funding, and I'll touch on federal funding here in a few minutes. Obviously, that's a barrier. We've already discussed the discrepancies between where we see NIH funding versus what's allocated then to USDA. One of the other barriers, if we look back at ourselves, is really marketing messages that we send forward. Because I interact a lot with the poultry industry, I look particularly to that of the message that some of the poultry industry sends forward, and that it's hormone-free. And that is a lot of consternation then amongst industries, and it perceives a different message that goes forward to the public. Looking then to how we can be relevant and present, part of this really is to develop better public and private interactions. This begets a number of different questions and issues in and of itself, one of which we discussed within our group is who owns the IP and who has access to the data. The industry has a wonderful cadre of data at their fingertips that the question becomes, can we access that for the better public good in some degrees? We recognize the need to model and identify different research needs. There also needs to be a little bit better transparency to the public of how data is generated and interpreted. And there's a need for recognition that nutrition can have dramatic impacts within the industry and for some of those grand challenges that we face. So as far as animal nutrition's prominence and discussion in animal health and welfare specifically, we need to make sure that the RFPs that are designed across interagencies are very specific to those interactions between animal health and welfare, that they seek then to identify biologic mechanisms and interactions, that then to the public that we can convey the message of conversion of the inedible to the edible, essentially as a value-added process to resources that we have. We have some public sector service messages where we need to try to balance some of that discussion across blogs, focus not on the negative stories, but some of the success stories that are out there, that animal nutrition in and of itself is not competing with, but rather complementing human nutrition. And we as scientists collectively across public entities as private entities, that we are willing to and able to interact then with other disciplines in venues such as FASEB coming up this next weekend up in Boston. So those were your messages that you sent out, just snippets. Again, we'll be sending forward a number of those in the coming weeks back out to you as we try and consolidate and summarize a lot of what was put forward within this meeting today. So I'd like to take it back to a few summary messages of other things that we heard from some of our panel members and some of our other speakers this morning. And one of the questions that I essentially came back with in looking through slides from our speakers was, really, does source of funding matter? And I think it does to some degree. I think in some cases we're starting the conversation, but that conversation is in its infancy and it needs to be fostered. I think the dual purpose with dual benefit grants are wonderful initiation of that process. But as Dr. Davis pointed out, I think we are in its infancy. Not a lot of those grants have been funded to date. If we look at just an average of 4 to 6 grants since 2011. The other thing is that moving into these arenas, animal scientists, poultry scientists, dairy scientists view themselves as just those disciplines, not necessarily as biologists. And moving into NIH, moving into NSF, not having that mindset of being a biologist and going into their world to where those panel members will be evaluating those grants has hurt us. And we need to be able to move us collectively as a discipline into that world to be able to facilitate that conversation and review process for our science as well. Part of this is reflected, I think, in Dr. Davis, what you brought forward, and I think this was a stunning statistic, that 98% of NIH-funded research in 2007 was in rodents, not necessarily in our domestic animal species. Again, I think we have some good stories. I think we're in the infancy of some of these funding process and mechanisms. I look forward to this public-private partnership and where it will go, related then to the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research as this comes forward into a reality. Kind of turning to Dr. Hartnell's work a little bit later, since I'm a poultry guy, I'm putting up, I think, probably the oldest of the domestic livestock and poultry species for the publications, more to illustrate an example of where it is. So this particular purple publication was derived, the chair of the committee was my major professor for my master's degree. That's why it was purple, because it was his favorite color. The publication's old enough to drink now. I purposefully put in there, if you go back to the publication, the years to which the information that was derived, which was used into the publication. As we look forward to the potential rewrite for this publication, there's been some criticism coming both from the public and private sector as to, can we be relevant today? Has enough research been done since then to justify a publication? And I think one of the sad commentaries, so to speak, is that as you look to some of the fundamental work that still needs to be done to drive the relevance of this publication, that we have lost the mechanisms to drive some of that foundational work. I'll put in my chicken example of why it is relevant. This is a very, very different critter today than where we have been. If we look just at need for protein driving compositional yield, very, very different bird that we have today. And this is a 14-year-old picture, but really very different critter to what we deal with. In my world, if we look to the bulk of information, we have a wonderful wealth of information in the broiler. But if I look to colleagues that are trying to fulfill the poultry sector's needs, the poultry sector is not only the broiler chicken market, it's also the laying hen market, which if I look at my academic colleagues in the US, we're probably about 6 or 7 of us that actually do laying hen research. It's probably fewer than that if we look at turkey research. So we are at a void of a human capital perspective to try and fulfill some of these needs beyond what we have from a federal funding perspective. So to summarize, essentially, if we look to nutrition research in our domesticated livestock and poultry species, we're very much at risk, partly because of inadequate funding, the disproportionate valuation and use in the health sector on rodent models. I think we're learning some wonderful things, but we could go much beyond that if we were able to incorporate some of those into our livestock and poultry species. We do need to see an increased investment in nutrition research. It's dramatically needed to improve animal ag and human health. We've talked a lot about that this morning. And I think this forum is one of those beginnings of the conversation, essentially. What I would like to see happen is we look to a number of the publications individually, by species through NRC, as well as collectively, as the report that Gary presented this morning. There has been a wealth of identification of needs, both through those individual species publications as well as through this publication collectively this last year. And it's taking that conversation then on those identification of research needs forward. So I look forward to having that conversation much more than we've had in years past. And with that, I'll turn it back to Don.